The Harvest.
Good afternoon, Africa. This is Imene Nouad with the latest news from across the continent and the world. In Somalia, both houses of the federal parliament hold an emergency session today to condemn the recognition of Somaliland by the Zionist entity. President Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud is expected to address lawmakers, while the United Nations Security Council is preparing an emergency session tomorrow to examine the legal and political implications of these escalations. Tensions continue to escalate after the Zionist entity's recognition of the self-declared Somaliland, prompting the United Nations Security Council to hold this urgent session. The African Union also holds this in high regard, reaffirming its support for Somalia sovereignty and territorial integrity, warning that any threats to its unity could have serious consequences across the Horn of Africa and beyond. Widad Alawa explains more on the topic.
Tensions rise in the Horn of Africa as the African Union reaffirms its unwavering support for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Federal Republic of Somalia. The AU stresses that Somalia's unity represents a red line for the continent, highlighting a core African principle, the protection of existing states against division. At the same time, the Union warns that any threat to Somalia's territorial integrity risks destabilizing not only the Horn of Africa, but the entire continent. Hassan Sheikh Ali Noor, an expert in political science at the Higher Institute for Security Studies in Mogadishu, explains more.
Before yesterday, Netanyahu claimed that his government recognized Somaliland as a sovereign state. Nonetheless, to my understanding or the reading what's going on in the region, I can say the Netanyahu's statement is nothing else except exaggeration and to try to export his own internal problem to the rest of the world.
On their side, African leaders interpret this statement as a political stance aimed at regional and international developments, whereas the broader international community largely rejects the recognition of self-declared entities, reinforcing the importance of respecting Somalia's sovereignty. Geopolitical analyst Abdulqadir Sufi comments.
Firstly, the UA reaffirmation of Somali sovereignty. It retailed its unwavering support for the unity and the territorial integrity of the Federal Republic of Somalia. Secondly, it's clear there is risks to peace. For that, the organization warned profound consequences for peace and stability on the continent. Feeling such a precedent could encourage other secessionist movements in Africa.
Meanwhile, the Zionist entity's recognition of the self-declared Somaliland provokes strong condemnation as a violation of international law and Somalia's territorial integrity. The move triggers urgent calls for a decisive response from the international community.
On the same issue, the Arab League is holding an emergency meeting today at the level of permanent representatives in Cairo, Egypt. The session responds to Somalia's request and aims to coordinate a joint Arab stand against the recognition of Somaliland, emphasizing the protection of Somalia's territorial integrity and regional stability. Always on Somalia, Algeria strongly condemns the Zionist entity's decision to recognize Somaliland, calling it illegal and a serious violation of Somalia's sovereignty. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs reaffirms Algeria's support for Somalia and warns that the move threatens peace and stability in the Horn of Africa and the Red Sea region. The statement adds that the action violates the UN principles and the African continental framework, particularly the prohibition against altering nation borders and the cornerstone of peace and security in Africa. In Sudan, a humanitarian crisis deepens with over 200 people, including women and children, are killed by the rapid support forces in western districts of Ambro, Sarba and Abu Kamra, the Sudan Doctors Union's reports. The conflict spreads from Khartoum following a power struggle between the army and the RSF leaders. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, the army condemns looting in the city of Oira by the M23 rebel group. The military warns civilians to remain cautious as forces intensify operations to regain full control, noting rebels disguise themselves among residents to avoid military action. On the political front in Guinea, elections are underway for the first time in more than 4 years, with around 6.7 million voters choosing a new president from 8 candidates. The vote marks the country's return to constitutional rule after a transitional period, with observers closely watching amid internet restrictions. Yasmin Ben Ashur explains how crucial this moment is for Guinea's political future.
For the first time in more than 4 years, elections are underway in Guinea. Today, around 6.7 million voters are choosing a new president from 8 candidates, marking the country's return to constitutional rule after a transitional period. Transitional President Mamadi Doumbouya, who had promised not to run, is keeping a low-profile campaign, relying on videos and ministers to speak on his behalf. Main challengers include Abdoulaye Yero Balde and Faya Milumunu, while Makali Kamara is the only woman in the race. Observers note that internet restrictions may affect monitoring, but the vote proceeds as a key step in Guinea's democratic process. Today's election is seen as crucial for shaping the country's political future.
In the Central African Republic, President Faustin Archange Touadéra seeks a third term as voting continues. 7 candidates run with opposition leaders Ancent George Dulugili and Henry Marie Dondra posing the main challenge. Provisional results are expected on January 5th. Côte d'Ivoire sees low voters turnout as legislative polls closed last night. Despite over 8 million registered voters, participation appears slower than in 2021. The ruling RHDP party maintains its majority following President Alassane Ouattara's recent re-election. Mali is facing a rapid outbreak of diphtheria since September. Emergency Relief Coordinator Tom Fletcher allocates $1 million from the UN Central Emergency Response Fund for urgent response amid concerns over the fragile health system. On the economic front, Niger reaffirms sovereignty over its uranium reserves. Ministers of Mines and Justice reject allegations from Paris, calling them an attack on national resources amid French investigation into alleged organized theft benefiting a foreign power. Concluding this harvest with the sports, the Africa Cup of Nations continues today. Gabon-Mozambique face-off is already underway in the second round, with Mozambique winning 3-1 over Gabon so far. Next up, we got Equatorial Guinea versus Sudan set to take off at 4 p.m. GMT. Then we have Algeria's Phoenix face Burkina Faso's Stallions in Group E around 6:30 p.m. GMT. After a 3-0 previous win over Sudan, defender Rami Ben Sebaini urges the squad to raise their level to secure a spot in round 16. And finally, there is Côte d'Ivoire facing off Cameroon at 9 p.m. GMT. That's all for today's harvest. Thank you to paying attention to the fullest. A big thank you to the director of this harvest, Muad Bab Ahmed, control board with Islam streaming with Rania, and observation by Tawas. Thank you all once again for following Ifriqiya FM, the voice of Africa.
Follow